The West, they've got cleaner skies and silent nights, but we've got Diwali drama and wedding invites. Out there, you might be a cog in their machine, but here you're the main character in a Bollywood scene. So if you ask, should I stay or flee? I say, stay, build and be. We're not perfect, but we're on the move, and you, my friend, have something to prove. So pack your dreams, not your bags. This is your moment in tricolor flags. Talking about things like air, etc., there's no taking away from the fact that India has to improve and grow. But there are two ways to do it. One is you stay within your people and you try to make a difference, like Mahatma Gandhi did. Or the second is then you go to America or to London and say that, this is what's happening in my country. Then it's not your country.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Overcorrection. Today we are in studio with Mr. Rishabh Shah. He is the founder of I.I.M.U.N, which is India's international movement to unite nations. It is an extremely large non-profit that focuses on youth engagement in policy issues and politics and societal issues. How strange was it that we thought it was important that 13-year-olds in India, in Mumbai, needed to play these characters on the UN Security Council when I don't know how my corporator in my constituency works?
The school education system has produced more Britishers than the Britishers have. And it's true. That started I.I.M.U.N, and that's where we made it an Indianized Model UN. If you can sit and talk about the US Congress, where somebody becomes a Republican and a Democrat, then why can't somebody become a Congress MP and a BJP MP? And then we went to the UN, we kind of realized the UN is just a big bureaucratic mess. And we said if the Indian Parliament people play Teen Patti, in the UN they play poker. That's the only difference. And in the UN you had an open bar, in the Parliament you don't have one. There is nothing left in the right and there's nothing right in the left. Politicians jump ship immediately. If only cameras like these were placed in the lives of politicians every day, then you are shell-shocked that a person who has such a strong ideological belief on TV is sitting with you and having meat. When outside it is, look, I am vegetarian and this is my policy. That's the disturbing fact. When you are on a podcast, you're acting and you're pretending. You're not your natural self.
I might be drunk right now. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Overcorrection. Today we are in studio with Mr. Rishabh Shah. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
He is the founder of I.I.M.U.N, which is India's international movement to unite nations. It is an extremely large non-profit that focuses on youth engagement in policy issues and politics and societal issues. Rishabh has had the pleasure of platforming everyone from Shashi Tharoor to Masoom Meenawala and has interviewed them. They are fantastic videos, which I certainly recommend you go watch. Please check out some of their live events, which are coming up as well.
So glad.
He has also come out with a book
Yes.
called Nothing But the Truth, which describes his learnings from some of these top pioneers in the field. So he has a lot of experience he's got under his belt from his exposure to these people. And we are going to be asking him some tough questions about India today.
Excellent. I'm excited and thank you for having me. Like I said, very excited to be on your podcast, and what you're doing with your podcast is slightly different. In fact, much different from what everybody else is doing. And therefore, when you messaged, and that's something that I really liked, I must mention this. He sent across a Instagram DM and said, Rishabh, would you like to do this? And that's the thing that I admire the most. I think when you ask for referrals by somebody else refers you, then I'm like, I usually say no. But when you write directly, and it took us 10 years to reach one of the people that we'll perhaps talk about in the conversation, but it took us 10 years to reach somebody. But eventually when he read the message and he said, Rishabh, I would like to now come. And then he said, but you knew these 10 people, why didn't you ask them in order to refer? And I said, because I wanted you to see it on merit. So many congratulations for writing on merit despite coming from the place that we come from, which is South Bombay.
Yeah, I'm sure we could have found some other way to link to you. But I think it's important that we have a discussion based on something that is important to both of us. And based on looking at your work, I was like, this guy is pro-India.
Right.
He's really pro-India.
Yes.
And amongst my circles and people I speak to and the general sentiment that I'm picking up around this country is that if people have the opportunity to leave India, they want to. I'm talking about people everywhere from these large millionaire exits that we're talking about, people taking golden visa programs all over the world. We're talking about people going on work visas to places like Australia, the UAE, Canada, less so the US, but only not for lack of trying. We have a lot of students exiting, hoping to do MBA programs to shift abroad. And it seems to be that the people who choose to remain in India either do it through one, well, because they are not privileged enough to have access to leave, or two, which I think is the more insidious part, is that they benefit from the really cheap labor economy in India, and their biggest reason for wanting to stay here is that things are so easy. Everything is done for me over here. I have so much staff. Over there, I have to do a lot of the work on my own. And this sort of puts me in a place like, wow, this is a really bad situation to be in.
What you're saying is true, that a lot of people who have the opportunity to fly off and look for greener pastures, so to say, they would want to go overseas. But having had the opportunity of being able to shift out there, the reason to stay back, at least for me personally, is that even if you look at all this tariff war that is going on and things like that, the World Bank and the IMF say that India's growth rate is yet pegged at 6.2, 6.3%. You see the number of airports that when I was in school, when we were in school, to the number of airports that are there today. So it's gone up from 74 to 159. You see the ease of doing business has gone down dramatically, where now we've gone down from, I think, 160s to about 40 or 50s in the world. So India is definitely growing. And because India is growing, eventually, that is one part. But the second part is eventually you're going to have to sell your products in the biggest marketplace of the world. You've got 160 crore people, essentially 65% of which are below the age of 35. So if you are going to make any product across the world, you're going to have to come back to India to sell it. So might as well, for your own sake, be in India, understand India, and then sell the product in India. So I think being Indian is intrinsically beneficial at this given point in time when one looks at it economically. So I think some of the 1%ers who are in charge, who are the biggest billionaires across the country and the world, continue to stay in India. They could easily shift overseas. I don't see, at least the people who are close to us on our advisory board, like say for example, Mr. Godrej, he's in India. Mr. Piramal is in India. So if these people are in India, of course their socio-economic strata is even in the 1% also, they're the 1%. But at the same point in time, they're out here because there is opportunity. So But
the generation below that,
sure,
right? A lot of them, like you have Mr. Jayashankar's son living in the United States. I think we have some other minister's son is a British citizen.
Correct.
So it's actually this generation that seems to want to leave a bit more.
So for this generation, that's what I thought. I've written something and perhaps read it out if it's okay.
Yes, please.
Because this is a podcast and I'm glad that we're doing this on a podcast. We're the largest democracy on earth where elections are louder than a BTS concert in Perth. We chant mantras in Sanskrit verse and binge Netflix shows that proudly curse. We built tech that powers Mars, yet still honk like maniacs in bumper-to-bumper cars. Our GDP is on a rocket to the moon, but Auntie still hides cash like it's a national monsoon. We touch lunar soil with ISRO's might, but won't start work till the Muhurat is right. We shout Atmanirbhar at startup meets, then text Ma ghar ka khana bhejna please. We've got IITs, IIMs and Jugaad that slaps, where Wi-Fi is patchy but rumors spread in caps. We say Atiti Devo Bhava with flair, but block the lift when relatives are there. We innovate, we work hard, we glow, and still get asked, Beta shadi kab karoge though? We do yoga, sip matcha, eat sushi and still debate, bro 70 hours come, thoda zyada nahi hai kya? We're CEOs in New York, coders in Berlin, but nothing beats vada pav at 4 p.m. We protest, we rage, we post it and then bend and touch feet because sanskar is great. We doomsday scroll through Twitter, call out the West, then vibe with a roomy quote, do what feels best. We march for climate change, sign global MOUs, and then plant 11 lakh trees in one day, but still no news. The West, and this is the interesting part, the West, they've got cleaner skies and silent nights, but we've got Diwali, drama, and wedding invites. Out there, you might be a cog in their machine, but here you're the main character in a Bollywood scene. So if you ask, should I stay or flee? I say, stay, build and be. Because if the world's a rerun, fading in loop, India's the director's cut, masala, plot and scoop. We're not perfect, but we're on the move. And you, my friend, have something to prove. So pack your dreams, not your bags. This is your moment in tricolor flags.
Yeah. That was beautiful, very funny. I did not know you are a poet.
I dabble. I dabble and this technology.
And you use ChatGPT to write some of that.
To refine it. I wrote it and then I refined it through ChatGPT. But no, what you said about, say, Jayashankar's son, and your dad's made it. Let's be honest. Your dad's made it. You yet have so much to prove. So the opportunity, and a lot of people who work at the organization come from South Bombay or South Delhi or South Bangalore or South Kolkata and all of these places. I personally feel that it's all the families that have done a lot of work. We ourselves yet have so much to prove. So if you want to prove something, then I think the city and the country, different parts of the country are places that you want to be in. You don't want to be far removed, and you don't want to be in places like Washington writing on India when actually you've not spent any time in India. So I find it quite funny.
That's actually that's a very interesting perspective. India is the land of opportunity today, I guess.
Correct.
And quite frankly, we talk a lot about different health metrics. People can complain about the AQI in India, and yes, we can address that.
Correct.
We can talk about it. We can
Correct.
talk about dust pollution leading to it. We can talk about bad infrastructure. We can talk about bad education, which we're going to get to. But when you talk about your psychosocial health, I guess proving yourself, making your mark, making a difference can probably have tremendous health benefits as well.
No, of course, yeah. And also talking about things like air, etc. And, all of the things that you mentioned. And there's no taking away from the fact that India has to improve and grow. But there are two ways to do it. One is you stay within your people and you try to make a difference. Like Mahatma Gandhi did. He had the choice of staying in South Africa. He didn't need to come to India. Or the second is then you preach from overseas and you say, this is what is happening in terms of press freedom.
Today in the New York Times, India's democracy index collapses.
Which is ridiculous because quite honestly, if you are sitting in a boardroom in New York and you're penning an article for Washington Post and then you're going to criticize India, then believe me, I mean, with all due respect for whatever you would have done, I wouldn't respect you as much as a person who would not write as articulately in English, but is criticizing the same country. But when they're sitting in Bangalore or in a small village and writing that article for, say, the Hindu, because there you are actually living in the country and then you have the right to criticize the country. If you want to go to America or to London and say that, this is what's happening in my country, then it's not your country.
So on this topic, I have to say that I was a part of MUN growing up, right? Model United Nations. I was an 8th standard student.
Right.
And we had to take part in MUN, and it was the really cool thing to do. It showed you were really educated and exposed and, had a broad view of the world. And we got to basically get a suit. Right,
Correct.
That's why everyone felt good. We got to wear a suit, play grown up for a day.
Correct.
Our school rented the Trident Hotel, where actual geopolitical leaders meet in boardrooms, and they sent us in there with suits, and we had to I had to pretend to be like Sudan in the UN Security Council, and had to pretend to understand all of that, and we got some fancy photos taken.
When Sudan was one country and not two.
Yeah, when I think I think now that you're mentioning it was two at that time still.
Okay.
It had just become, I think that's why we were treating it as the issue, like North Sudan, South Sudan.
Okay.
And it took me years, decades later, when I was a grown-up doing a job stuck in traffic on my way to Andheri, that it dawned on me that how strange was it that we thought it was important that 13-year-olds in India, in Mumbai, needed to play these characters on the UN Security Council when I don't know how my corporator in my constituency works.
Correct.
When I don't know how a single piece of legislation is passed, how it could actually affect me. The fact that our civics textbooks, when I think back to how I learned about how a bill becomes a law, I might as well have been learning Chinese because it was never actually put into any context that would actually affect my life. It's like, here's how a bill becomes a law, learn these 13 steps. Let me talk to you about one bill that has become a law that has actually affected you or your family in the last 10 years. Oh, they skipped that part.
Sure.
So, which is why I found it interesting that you actually had started your organization as a Model United Nations organization.
Correct.
And then you've kind of then branched from there to have it not be about Model UN, but rather about India's issues.
Correct.
How did that work out? How did you sort of make that change?
So, to be honest, in a nutshell, the concept was a Model UN, but an Indianized Model UN. And that stemmed from my personal experience of not knowing anything about the country. As a presumptuous teenager finishing first in a Model UN competition, I came back and I told my granddad saying I'll run the company. It's a 100-year-old company. So he looked at me and he said, Rishabh, you don't know anything about the country. So I said, what is to know about the country? Because if you lived in South Bombay all your life, you think your country starts and finishes before the sea link. We didn't have the coastal roads back then, nor did we have the sea link. So the idea so then he said, if you answer this correctly, then I will let you run the company. So I said, not a bad deal. So he said, which is the first book on foreign policy that was written? So I said, because we were always taught The Art of War by Sun Tzu. He held my long disheveled hair and then he said, Rishabh, there's a book called The Arthashastra, which Chanakya has written. And then he gave me a 2-hour lecture like all grandparents do. And it was 2010, I remember yet very fondly. And President Obama had come to India for his first state visit. So then he did a town hall at St. Xavier's College, and in a publicly recorded lecture, he said the world has so much to learn from India. And then he met a bunch of people, 100 smart people, 99 smart, and one over smart student managed to get in. And there he quoted Sham Dam Dand Bhed. And I said, listen, this is the same thing that Granddad was talking about. Went back home, I kind of realized, picked up Arthashastra back then. Then realized, not because my granddad said it, but because Obama said that there's this. And you need that validation of the white man or the black man.
Not even the white man. That's how crazy it is.
Yeah. And then you picked up an Indian book. I don't claim to understand the Arth of Arthashastra, but one thing that I kind of understood after reading the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and all of this is, and then I went to the Yoga Sutras and so on and so forth, is that, look, what we're talking about in the West, and I'm not saying that don't read Machiavelli, I'm not saying don't read Aristotle, you must read it because otherwise you'll be out of sync with what's happening in the world. But you also must read Kalidas. We were never taught in school, we were taught Shakespeare.
Briefly.
Yeah,
Rahim ke dohe creeped in, bounced. But briefly.
Very briefly.
Macbeth, I studied the book for a whole year. 1 year English literature was just Macbeth.
And jovially I mentioned this, that the school education system has produced more Britishers than the Britishers have. And it's true. And long story cut short, that started I.I.M.U.N, and that's where we made it an Indianized Model UN. So an Indianized Model UN basically meant that you have to wear Indian clothes. You need to... you are allowed to speak in Indian languages. You also have a mock Lok Sabha. So I remember going to schools like Cathedral, like Green Lawns, and they said, Rishabh, how is this a model United Nations? So I said, ma'am, if you can sit and talk about the US Congress, where somebody becomes a Republican and a Democrat, then why can't somebody become a Congress MP and a BJP MP? And that's where essentially I.I.M.U.N began. So I.I.M.U.N essentially was a model UN 2011 to 2015. And then we changed it to a movement to United Nations because Pranab Da told me, former president, when he met us, and he said, Rishabh, you're doing more for people understanding India and less for the United Nations. And then we went to the UN and we kind of realized the UN is just a big bureaucratic mess. We organized an event out there in 2016 and we said if the Indian Parliament people play Teen Patti, in the UN they play poker. That's the only difference. And in the UN you had an open bar, in the Parliament you don't have one. So respectfully. And that essentially was the only difference, which is why we changed it and we said, let's stop doing model. And I wish somebody in 2011 had told me, Rohan, because we took Model UN to Srinagar, we took Model UN to Kanyakumari, we took Model UN to Ranchi. We then started this bandwagon. Before 2011, there were 19 schools that did MUN. Out of the 19, I'm pretty sure 12 or 13 were South Bombay. And we made the mistake of calling it a Model UN for 5 years, and therefore Model UN became synonymous across the country. And today you've got 150,000 plus schools doing a Model UN conference. And I wish somebody had corrected me back then. And
you
said,
started this.
And no, it's a good thing. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not.
No, it's a good thing. I'm joking. But now thinking
yeah.
back, that could have been 150 model Lok Sabhas.
Correct. And so we had a model Lok Sabha in the first year, but if we called it a movement to United Nations, then people would not blindly just ape the West. Because in I.I.M.U.N from the first year, we've always had a model Lok Sabha. But today in a school in Ranchi, when I go to the school in Ranchi, everybody's suited up and talking about Sudan. But then I ask them saying, "Tu Lok Sabha kahan gaya?" And then public goes like, "Arey, but Rishabh, global citizen banana hai." But the problem is in the globe, we don't want to make it global citizens, we want to make them local citizens. And I think that's what the idea of I.I.M.U.N essentially is. I'm sorry, it's a long answer. I'm very passionate about this.
It's superb because there's a couple of things we should talk about leading from that. So we were talking about, this is a movement to sort of help India solve global problems.
Correct. From an Indian lens.
I think from an Indian lens. But
Correct.
The first step to doing that is, like we said, kind of solving our own problems, becoming a strong contender.
Correct.
Nationally, having some sort of strong ideology as a country as well, a way we stand, a way we work. And like you said, we have to be able to fix our Lok Sabha before we can fix the United Nations. Yeah. And as a joke, I always say, now when I look back, I'm 31 now, right? So I was 13 years old when I did my first month. That's been about 17 years. The UN has been a joke over the last 15 years. Of course. I think now even I can say that. First, when I started reading about this, I was like, oh, this is just 15, 20 years in. What have they been doing?
Nothing.
Anything of significance? I'm sure they've been doing some things, but nothing like what it was portrayed out to be, the global force that is going to preserve peace through our world.
Rohan, from the crisis in Rwanda, Srebrenica, you see Darfur when you did Sudan, and you look at the current crisis in Israel-Palestine, you look at the current crisis that are happening across the globe.
Hey, but they strongly condemned all those. You know what? They did. They had 250 people working there to strongly condemn
Which is the same resolution you passed when you were 13 years old. That I strongly condemn all the actions.
I did that.
And Ron, can I tell you something? It's not the problem of, it's the way the UN is structured. The problem is, as India, we will always go into the UN, and today is of course a very sensitive day to talk about it, but we'll always go into the UN saying Kashmir belongs to us. And I fundamentally believe that Kashmir belongs to us. But Pakistan is also taught that Kashmir belongs to them. So now if you're a 14-year-old Pakistani student, and I'm a 14-year-old Indian student, and I have to defend Kashmir, you also have to defend your version of Kashmir. How will we ever reach a compromise? The thing is, Indian debate, which is not the Oxford style of debate, which is the Purva Paksha style of debate, which is where you understand the other person's perspective and then you debate on yours, is not what we were taught in school. In school we were taught saying, you have to follow the foreign policy that has always been followed since the last 75 years. So if Israel always follows Israel's foreign policy and Palestine always Palestine's, how will we solve an issue? So that I think is a fundamental problem.
We were given wrong points for having like a unique solution. It's like, no, they would never accept this compromise.
Correct. And that's what we at a grassroots level are trying to change, saying, look, you can be a BJP MP and you can praise what the Congress has done, and you can be a Congress MP and then you can praise the BJP. The problem is, we can do it with kids, but when the real parliamentarians start praising the opposite party, and the chairperson of our advisory board, Shashi Tharoor, gets severe flack sometimes for praising the opposite party. And one can jovially mention it on a podcast, but I can only imagine the repercussions that one has to go through when you're an actual parliamentarian and praising the other side.
Absolutely. You know, I want to get into some more political issues with you right now. So I'm very disillusioned by how I see political discourse happening around me. Correct. So I'm sure you have a friend group, as I have a friend group. A discussion ensued amongst my friends. They were like, oh, this guy's a little right of center, this guy's a little left, this guy's totally left, this guy's totally right, XYZ, XYZ. And I started realizing that people basically meant pro-Modi or anti-Modi.
Correct.
I started asking them one by one, hey, can you give me maybe
10 things.
2 or 3. One, start with 2-3 policy level things that you can ideologically defend based on your personal ideology of being, say, right wing or left wing. I have no issue with some people are right leaning, some people are left leaning. But today, if you ask people based on what policy are you saying that the BJP is right leaning or that the Congress is left leaning, they typically don't have too many answers other than a few hot button issues. You know, they'll say CAA.
Correct.
They will say Jammu Kashmir. They'll say Article 370. Correct. But past that, if you ask them, say, on economic policy, on foreign policy, on stuff like taxes, on trade, there's no actual connection between an ideology and your politics anymore.
There is no ideology. I humbly say this, that, and I'm so glad you brought this up, is that there is nothing left in the right and there's nothing right in the left. There is nothing left because politicians jump ship immediately. Young politicians who should be actually studying a Savarkar or who should be studying Nehru, if you are in the Congress party and if you want to build a future in the Congress party, just because you don't get a ticket today, they jump ship. And this is the sad reality of Indian polity today, that actually if you go to see the number of BJP MPs who were once in Congress, you'll be surprised that that number is more than the original MPs of the BJP who are in the BJP. And it is a missile. If this is the kind of Indian polity that we have, where even ideology is something that you don't believe in, and then people give me the garb of developmental politics, which I'm sure you must have heard, and you must get some of these politicians and don't give them the script. I would love to see a podcast where essentially some of these politicians, or young politicians, you sit them down and ask them saying, so tell me about Golwalkar and Hegdeshwar and tell me why do you defend them, and track that politician, and 20 years later if the politician is in the same party, then life's great. But I can guarantee you that young people, because they want a greener pasture, they shift, and that's something that is fundamentally wrong in our politics, which is what I think one must try to address at some level.
I was reading this article about regional parties in India and how they've basically just become vote banks for major parties during election time. Correct. And it just creates so much confusion. You try to read about Indian politics today, there's like 100 different parties.
Correct.
Now people criticize a two-party system for being very rigid. But this is confusing. I'd say rigid might be better than confusing in some situations.
No, 100%. And what's happened with regional political parties also is the fact that you've not got leadership which is viewed as leadership, right? Apart from a few, of course. Mamata Banerjee is one strong example, or there is M.K. Stalin, who's a strong example. If you don't have the strongman leader today, Rohan, then you're not considered to be a good political party. The definitions of leadership are also fast changing. The definitions of who we see as role models are fast changing. Earlier, it used to be much more soft politics. Now it's become hardcore politics. And if you differ with anything that I say, that means you aren't a part of my political party. And that's where I think even the young politicians are being pushed towards. So many young politicians who've come out of I.I.M.U.N. who are in politics today and won't take specific names because they have political careers. But the idea that when these people have to parrot a particular line, and they are actually moderate, sensible people, but they're parroting extreme lines. And when they're doing that, at that juncture, what's happening is an entire demographic, which is the next electorate, is getting polarized. And then there's a vast majority that is not going to polls. Out of the 4.8 crore young people who were 18 or 19 who were eligible to vote, you had less than 2 crore people who registered to vote, and a fraction of that actually went to vote. And the budget that was allocated in order to get young people to vote was astronomical. And the fact that yet we were unable to get our young people to vote. And why is that? So the problem is nobody is willing to talk about these kind of issues. And believe me, when you get, and I do hope sincerely that we have a more American style of conversation where you have the leader of opposition and you have the prime minister come on the same forum. And believe me, this is the first time I'm mentioning it on camera, but this is the first, we offered it. We said, let I.I.M.U.N. be that platform where both of you come and you debate. Any which our questions won't be hard hitting. Correct. So we're not Karan Thapar, we're not Arnab Goswami. We'll have a softer, nicer conversation, but it was denied.
And I think even with the soft, nicer conversation, just the visual for our country to see these people sharing a stage should be healing.
Correct.
I think it's important that we don't live in such a divisive time. I mean, with what's happened right now
in Kashmir.
Correct.
Let me also mention this, that religion is being utilized in order to divide people. Religion was never conceptualized in the first place, our religion at least, which is Hinduism and the book that we believe in. And I completely concur with what you said, before I go off into this rant again. I concur with what you said. You've got so much of divide between Hindus and Muslims, not today. It's been since independence. We've of course got a lot of harmony in our country, but at the same point in time, that division yet exists. Anybody who says that division does not exist is lying, in my humble opinion. There is division, and there may not be division in South Bombay and South Delhi. There may not be that division, you may not see that division, because the people in South Bombay and South Delhi are brought up differently. But the division yet exists in different parts of India, having travelled there, having had kids participate from there, and having parents tell me saying, "Tu mera beta aaj Hindu MP banega." Which is absurd. So this does exist. And the problem is how we perceive religion, how we see religion. In our religion at least, in the Vedas, and having read my fair share of it again and again, and different interpretations of it, I don't claim to be an expert, but I don't see the mention of the word Hinduism in that. I don't see the mention of the fact of what we project Hinduism to be today. The concept of Sanatan Dharma, which got best articulated later by Aurobindo, is all-encompassing, is accepting of everybody. If we are going to start demarcating people in the bracket of Jain, Parsi, Muslim, etc., then I think we've lost the very essence of what at least I believe in is the concept of oneness of Advaita Vedanta. And that is what India stands for, and therefore it's called India's international movement to unite nations, where I fundamentally believe that first we correct domestically, and then India is the only country that can actually unite different countries, because and it's not just because of Mahatma Gandhi. It goes all the way back to Advaita Vedanta, where we actually believe in the concept of oneness, which today quantum physics is proving.
Yes, we actually have a deep spiritually secular basis to our country. We are like Hinduism, like I've spoken about this before, like my grandmother always said, it's not even like a religion. It's not. It's just how we live.
Correct.
And I want to ask now about a very specific topic, because there's a lot of discussion around how our country should be run.
Correct.
In terms of having a uniform civil code.
Right.
Now, I believe there are certain topics which you should be able to make a decision about ideologically based on some logical. I believe in these principles, hence this follows. Rather than this policy is followed by this party and so I'll vote for it. So with the UCC, which is what I wanted to talk about with you again. UCC is typically in India today a BJP, pro-BJP movement.
Correct.
Right? The BJP is pro the UCC, the Congress is against the UCC. In some ideological ordering of this, a right-leaning party that believes in religion and believes in these type of religious ideas seeping their way into the country's governance, they should be against the UCC. And a liberal party, which is super atheistic, traditionally, you know, when you look at what liberals stand for, they should be like, dude, UCC, obviously we're going to have that. Like, we're going to have a secular, non-religious code governing a country. How did this get flipped in India?
No, there's a reason why we started. In the beginning, I said there's nothing left in the right and there's nothing right in the left. You know, there is warped, and when the private conversations take place, at that juncture, many of these very renowned politicians who've come to the organization confess things like what you just mentioned. And then they're like, but ye wo 20 साल से चालू है ना. अभी कैसे बदल देंगे?
Yeah,
so but it's ridiculous. An educated young person such as yourself can see through this, but a politician who's educated, who is in charge of his political party,
can pretend not to see through it.
Correct.
Like, that's his biggest skill,
That
is
is
to
it.
pretend not to see through it. It can't. I was like, am I stupid?
No. See, listen, either this podcast makes no sense or either this podcast is groundbreaking and is making a lot of sense. I would like to believe it's latter.
I hope so. The other issue I wanted to ask you on is this other issue which I didn't understand, that how it got politicized. In a right-left, from an ideological basis, one nation, one election. It's an administrative issue.
It's
how
a no-brainer.
you can most effectively organize financially and for effectiveness organize elections. It is an administrative decision.
No, and Rohan, if I may, but I'll let you finish, please. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's my whole thing. It's like, this should not be debate. Like, how is it such a coincidence that everyone in the Congress or who supports the left-wing party disagrees with it, and everyone
not everyone in the Congress, not because he's one of my favorite politicians, but not everyone in the Congress. Shashi Tharoor doesn't.
Okay.
He says that one nation, one election should be. There are so many educated politicians in the Congress want to say, and they say it openly also in some cases, and then there is a whole
and they get in trouble for it, right? For what is like, how is this a bipartisan issue?
And the funny part is, the Congress, in the first 3 elections, if I'm not wrong, we had those elections as we had one general election where it wasn't divided and we didn't have multiple elections throughout. So technically you're only bringing back what Pandit Nehru did. So the supporter of this policy should be the Congress party, but sometimes opposition for the sake of opposition is not good in our country. And that is what the young spokespersons, the young politicians in our country must realize. Just because you're on a primetime debate and you need to score brownie points with the person who is going to determine whether you get a ticket or not, should not be the reason why you lose your moral compass. And unfortunately, the moral compass for them is the party and is the religion. And if you shift the moral compass from there, then somehow you're not going to score brownie points and you're not going to progress upwards. And therefore, my favorite philosopher, talking about philosophy outside, Friedrich Nietzsche, who says, morality is an interpretation of phenomenon. What I understand as just one line, some of these very well read, it's not they're stupid, they're very well read, they know what they're saying doesn't make sense. But they yet continue to say it because their party line and because the religion and the color that they are wearing is demarcating or is telling them, saying that they have to say it. And that's my biggest problem with Indian politics. Till that changes, till the time we put Hindu-Muslim behind, we are not going to progress as a country.
Can you imagine the cognitive dissonance and load it must create? It's actually much harder to believe something inside and say something. Like, it's like, if I say that I say what I feel, it's a very easy way to live my life. It's like what Mark Twain said, right? A man who never lies never has to remember a thing.
Correct. And therefore, I personally feel that every Neta is an Abhineta. But whereas every Abhineta cannot be a Neta. And that is what one must realize. But every Neta is a fantastic Abhineta. Because when you see them, and I have observed over the last 14 years of doing I.I.M.U.N, when I go like this and I talk to somebody, right? So first up, they would not, if you've not read about I.I.M.U.N, you wouldn't know about it. And then later on, when you become close enough and you start talking, and then you are shell-shocked that a person who has such a strong ideological belief on TV or on social media is now talking, is sitting with you and having meat, when outside it is, look, I am vegetarian and this is my policy, this is what I believe in, and so on and so forth. And that's the disturbing fact. And the more I spend time in India, the more I realize how far removed, if only cameras like these were placed in the lives of politicians every day, India would be a very different country.
What's crazy to me is also when you're talking about having cameras on people in the government, all parliamentary sessions are actually available for public consumption.
Correct. But how many watch Parliament?
No one watches it. Right. You will literally watch and freak out about India's got latent stuff that's going on. But you won't see something outrageous happening in Parliament and you won't comment on it. So there, in some places, it's willful ignorance. There are cameras.
Correct. So we are also to blame. But at the end of the day, if we are going to be told every day saying that we are consuming content on social media, we are going to be fed with podcasters, and sorry, I have nothing against podcasters and influencers, but if I personally believe that not all biceps need to be filled with beer. I personally believe that all talent in our country does not need to be latent. And I personally fundamentally believe that not every kid who's a human in Bombay needs to be a rebel, to be blatant. I believe this fundamentally. And I think that our government is pushing agenda through distractions such as social media. Not just our current government, all political parties are pushing through agenda through social media, and social media influencers are willingly lapping it up, and because they're getting the money, and therefore the conversations are also like that. Therefore, when suddenly you go to a comedy show, then your conversation becomes very different, because when you are on a podcast, you're acting.
Yeah.
You're acting and you're pretending. You're not your natural self. If all podcasters also did their work with the same authenticity, then it would be very different. And
I might be drunk right now.
No, and it is therefore that I keep mentioning that it's not an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old. An 18 or a 22-year-old is today being told, saying there's a 1 billion fund that we are putting aside for creating, and Ashwini Vaishnavji put aside 1 billion for influencers. We created national awards for influencers and creators. Is this how we're going to create jobs?
And we also then have a lot of the entrepreneurial drive in India being catered to the gig economy workers.
Correct.
Something else we were briefly going to touch
Correct.
upon, which is the criticism that has been levied towards Indian entrepreneurs. Now, I feel it's a little heavy-handed, because what we're going to get into is that the back-end infrastructure that the government has lacked to provide Indians is what has led to the people in our workforce. They are right now capable of doing gig economy jobs. We cannot just start Apple and expect all these Swiggy drivers to go and start coding for them.
Correct.
Right. So when you're criticizing these entrepreneurs for making India full of delivery boys, hey, how about we educate Indians so that they can do something other than being a delivery boy? Because today they can't.
Correct. And because you're not educating them, and you've hit the hammer where it hurts the most. The problem is, and as we discussed this earlier, in 1968 was the first national policy on education. Okay. 1986 was the second national policy on education. In 2020, they did a great thing. They changed the name National Policy of Education and made it National Education Policy. But the content of it, and some of the people who were involved with our organization were some principals and schools were consulted for the national education policy, and it's a good policy, it's a great policy. But the first policy said 6% of our GDP should be spent on education. Okay. The next also said that 6% should be spent. The current says the same thing. No government since 47 till 2025 has spent 6%. The governments that have spent also 4.5% have given back that percentage, saying, "Hame pata nahi ki hum kharcha kahan kare." So now tell me this one thing: if you are not going to educate people, how are these people going to go on and get better jobs? How are these people going to create good startups? The problem is you are not building a good foundation. You are building roads, and it's given that India needs roads, and living in Bombay, we need it more than most.
But it's not to go to school.
It's not. It's
the roads are not to go to school.
It's not to go to school. And like you said, and I think this was your statistic, where you said that 35% of the people
are in private education. look at people who don't actually have that much money choosing to go to private education because your public education is failing.
Correct. So this is a massive...
Where can you spend that money? I will tell you. I can personally tell you some examples. Okay, put girls' bathrooms in every school.
Correct.
Major reason for why girls don't go to school is because they can't use the washroom. There's actually this heartbreaking commercial that I don't know if it came out of it. It's just an idea that back from my copywriting days, but it showed this boy and this girl getting ready in a village to go to school, and you'd see the mom would give the girl a chapati and then give the boy 3 chapatis, and then give the girl a little half glass of milk, and the boy would get 2 glasses of milk. And you think it is this really patriarchal society where they're trying to feed the boy more and make sure he's healthy, and they don't really care about the girl. And it turns out that they can't feed the girl more because her school doesn't have a bathroom.
It's very sad.
Very sad, right? So there are places, I guess, to spend that money on.
Get it to 6%. They're not giving 6%. They're not giving 6%, and that's the biggest problem. So 6% is not being spent. The policy that was made in 68 is yet not implemented in 2025 is what I was trying to articulate. But what you said about girls' bathrooms is, of course, is the need of the hour. But at the same point in time, we don't even have teachers, Ron.
Just stay at home only then.
Yeah, there are no teachers in government schools. The amount of vacancies that are there. So the problem is nobody wants to become a government school teacher. Nobody wants to become a teacher. Tell me how many times, apart from well-educated individuals who are more than educated people who have the sanskar right, who have the culture and the values right, how many of our friends have gone back to school and said thank you to the history teacher in class in South Bombay and South Delhi? And this is all across the country. And so nobody wants to become a school teacher. And the ones who are becoming school teachers are not getting jobs anywhere else, and therefore they're becoming school teachers. So so it's a big problem.
And can I tell you where parents are spending their money on education? Nurseries.
Yes.
You're talking about like nurseries. Like I've recently become a father, and as of 3 months, when your child turns 3 months, they recommend you get admission into nurseries. That's how competitive a market is. Nurseries today are charging anywhere between... and decent nurseries, in South Mumbai, what your peer group will go to here in South Mumbai, anywhere from 3 lakhs a year to, if you go to the Ambani nursery, 12 lakhs a year. To make your kid play for 2 hours a day, 180 days a year. These teachers are paid more than Jai Hind college teachers. Why would you want to get into education?
No, are you asking that personally to me or just generally?
In general, where is the incentive for us to have better teachers? I mean, right now we're seeing something like the US divesting from investing in universities and taking funds away from Harvard.
Correct.
Right, because they went through that whole cycle. Teachers were paid very well there. Then they started spending money on extra crap instead of raising teacher salaries. So teacher salaries stayed stagnant and fees have shot through the roof.
Correct.
In India, we've never had that surge in teacher salaries ever.
So which is why people won't get into teaching.
Education. It's not a respectable profession.
Correct. But I would encourage any young person. And the problem is that when you come from areas such as this, you have anomalies. So a very good friend of mine wanted to leave her very high paying job in... one of these finance companies, and she was going to become the youngest CFO of that company. And we were having a discussion, and I sleep at 10 and get up at 4. So I barely meet my friends, and therefore I'm removed from most WhatsApp groups. But the idea that one of the days she caught up with me and she said, Rishabh, you run an NGO, what money? And so I said, money comes separately. This is charity. She's like, but if I work in a school, that's going to be full-time charity. I will never get a chance to earn any money. So I said, yeah, but are you passionate about it? And she said, yes, in a private school. And so the private schools that you're talking about, of course, is the 1% of the 1%. But I'm saying in a private school also, the salary was 60,000 to 70,000.
Yeah.
You said 70,000, Rishabh, 70,000, what will happen in...
I have an EMI on my Merc.
No, and it's true. And so the girl wanted to do it. Can I tell you this? The girl wanted to do it. She left her job to take up this job. But for whatever reason, and I personally believe maybe otherwise, for whatever reason, and my reason for this was that civil society in and around her friends would say, Arey, boss, 70,000 ka you're going to become a teacher in a school, boss. What are you going to do? But a teacher in a school is the reason why both of us are sitting out here.
Yeah.
And if we don't have a good school teacher in Ranchi or in Rourkela, then how are you going to have a progressive nation? So I think one of the biggest things is give 6% to education. Second, whichever political party tells me saying we're giving 6% to education,
Vote for them.
Vote for them.
That's simple. You don't have to have any more thoughts about it.
Correct.
One thing, one issue, one policy. I have a separate one I'll throw in there. Any political party that says they will enforce the mandatory cleanup of construction sites at the end of a day's work, where they cover up the dust and put water on it, I'll vote for them.
Correct.
Two simple policy issues that could change your life, change your future of this country.
Absolutely.
Air quality and education. And it's more tangible than probably everything they say they are running on otherwise.
Absolutely. And to get young people then the third, if I were to add, is to get young people into politics. What the problem is, young people our parliament today, the Lok Sabha average age is 56. You've got a union cabinet whose average age is upwards of 60. You've got a Rajya Sabha, average age is 63.
And a life expectancy in our country lower than all of that.
And the funny thing in this is you're not fit enough, according to the Indian Constitution, to be a judge of a High Court at the age of 62, of a Supreme Court at the age of 65. But somehow you are fit enough in order to make policy, which the rest of the country has to follow when you are above 65. So technically, for a country whose median age is 27, you have parliamentarians who are 56 who are making policy for a country where most of the lingo that is utilized, if you put 10 veteran politicians who are leading major political parties in a room and say, answer what they're talking, interpret what they're talking, believe me, they won't be able to interpret what they're talking, because they are great-grandparents making policy for their grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So it's, so I think there have to be young people in politics. Countries such as, if I'm not wrong, Uganda have made it mandatory. Countries such as Uganda, and I say it with utmost respect, have made it mandatory in order to reserve certain seats for young people. Okay. We have reservations of all sorts, which made it very difficult for me to get into HR college on open merit. And then I was thinking, saying, should I become Sindhi for 3 days? But the idea being that when you have reservations for everything, why can't you have reservations for young people? And then let them be from any caste, creed, community, religion, etc. But give me 10% seats in a parliament for young people. There was actually a bill that was moved, a private members bill that was moved, but that private members bill never saw day of light because nobody wanted to discuss it. We want their votes, but we don't want policy for them.
And also, you'll probably affect the voter turnout through that too. You have young people actually standing for elections. South Mumbai right now, voter turnout is like 40%.
Yeah. One of the lowest
voter turnouts, and this is what I've heard about, why rich people don't vote. Because a vote is not something they can buy more of. It's like, I'm only going to have the same as this other dude who has nothing. Like, why would I bother? They are used to things where they can they can exert more authority in a situation with money.
Correct.
But the beauty of democracy is you can't.
Correct. And I think all the rich people who would be watching the podcast, the idea is that you must vote. If you don't vote, if the 1%ers are away from our country, the 1%ers choose to live differently. And that's what we started the podcast with. The 1%ers choose to be alienated from our nation will always remain a developing nation. I will tell you this, when we were growing up in 2002, Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, his campaign was an India Shining campaign, that 20 years from now, India will be shining. There's a Viksit Bharat campaign. I was invited by the government on one rare occasion, because they know our views are neutral in nature, so sometimes some people prefer to stay away. But in this one rare occasion, they said, Rishabh, why don't you come and become a Viksit Bharat ambassador? And there was a bunch of ministers who felicitated, etc. And I said, great, but can I ask you a question honestly? Will Bharat become Viksit in 2047? And the answer was, yes, of course it will become Viksit. So I said, then promise me that we'll have 6% on education. And then they said, Rishabh, वापस चालू कर दिया आपने. Despite all of what I said, my cousin sister yet stays in America.
Yeah.
I've not been able to convince her. So I do hope that through this podcast, at least we convince 2 more people.
Yeah, maybe to stay. And, like we said, from economic opportunities, social opportunities to prove yourself. Don't escape and leave to an easier life. Hey, make it here.
Correct.
And, there will be some reward to it.
there'll be reward, economic reward, there will be social reward, and at the end of the day, wherever you go, this is the sad part. Even if you're Priyanka Chopra, at the end of the day, when you're accepting an award, you're A.R. Rahman, you're accepting an award, the first thing that you're going to identify with is the Indian passport.
Yeah, and even if you say gave up your passport and became a British citizen, I think anecdotally, if you ask anyone around you who's lived abroad, you're never going to feel as at home as you feel in your country. I think I'm as much of a globalized citizen as people can get. I've lived abroad, I've studied abroad, I have plenty of friends abroad. I have family close, like my immediate family has given up Indian passports. They will be the first to tell you that there's no place like home. So let's make home like no other place.
Super.
Something like that.
That's a great note to end on. And the other one thing which I'll just quickly say, if you don't mind,
please,
is what you touched upon, that we need a more neutral, more centered India. There is something there's a Sanskrit Subhashita that goes like Amantram Aksharam Nasti, Nasti Mulo Manuksham, Ayogya Purusho Nasti, Yojakas Tatra Durlabha, which basically translates into there is no man who is perfect. But the thing is that there is the ability to be able to learn from an individual depends upon oneself and the ability to find a good teacher. I think if you can bring on your podcast people from diverse walks of life who have different ideologies, and that's what I'm keen to see as your podcast grows.
I would love to.
That if you get all of those people and can present their opinions and can have candid conversations, because I'll be honest, in front of camera, they've not been able to have candid conversations. And I don't know how many of them will be willing to also, given the fact that their careers are dependent upon it.
And I think that's where we can learn from the US.
Correct.
People are succeeding by breaking the mold.
And by being honest.
People are being able to see through. I mean, people will joke and say, oh, you think Trump's honest? It's like, no, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that the level of discourse is certainly more open there.
Correct.
And we should learn from that.
Of course. And there's so much to learn from the West. And there's so much to learn from your own country. So as when we started, perhaps this can be my outro if you want. But as when we started that, don't stop reading Prince's... Machiavelli's Prince. The Prince is Machiavelli. And start reading... Machiavelli's Prince. Don't stop reading Machiavelli's Prince and start reading Chanakya's Arthashastra. It's important to understand both Shakespeare and Kalidas. And I think that's what hopefully people should do.
Yep. That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Rishabh, for being here. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please go check out Rishabh. You can follow him on his personal Instagram, but definitely go check out I.I.M.U.N's Instagram page and their YouTube channel. All their talks are up there. All the ones I referenced below. Please go check out his book. That is there linked. We'll be putting links to that below in the description. Absolutely. Rishabh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I hope that you call me when you get millions of followers.
Definitely. We'll be doing that. Guys, thank you so much for watching the episode. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. As always, I'm Rohan Paranjpe. This is the Overcorrection. Cut.